and to Newswatch. And speaking about global warming hysterics, Joe Biden types, yeah, it's incredible how this hysteria is never challenged on the ABC. You can make the most incredible apocalyptic claims on the national broadcaster, complete rubbish, and never be corrected. I mean, this is an organisation that lets in Tim Flannery, remember him, even the rains that fall will not actually fill our dams and our river systems. They let him go into studios, they never ask him about that. Now, this is not healthy. I mean, this apocalyptic kind of talk, you know, the Joe Biden stuff, that scares people. Just like the virus panic is now scaring people literally to death. I'll give you an example of how the ABC lets all this go. The ABC's flagship 7:30 show last week interviewed Jane Fonda, the actor-activist who first got famous with the titillating Barbarella, and 2 Academy Awards later, she's still starring in Grace and Frankie in her 80s. But Fonda's always been a hard-left activist. And of course now, being one who's pushing global warming, it's a natural thing, and has written a new book about it. Here's how the ABC introduced her last week.
Jane Fonda is an award-winning actor, model, aerobics instructor and activist. She became a political activist in the 70s, gaining the nickname Hanoi Jane for her public opposition to the US war in Vietnam.
Actually, they barely introduced the segment. I'm already wanting to contradict them. Joining me is Gerard Henderson, head of the Sydney Institute, columnist with the Australian newspaper, and author of the Media Watchdog blog, fabulously read every Friday. Gerard, before we get to what Fonda actually said, is it entirely accurate to say that she got the nickname Hanoi Jane for being against the US involvement in the Vietnam War?
She wasn't against the war. She was against the US involvement. She wanted North Vietnam to win. She wanted Vietnamese soldiers and others to kill American troops. She was called Hanoi Jane. This wasn't said by Lee Sales. She was called Hanoi Jane because she went to Hanoi and stood next to actually got in a surface-to-air missile which was supplied by the Soviet Union. Half a century ago, these were the most sophisticated weapons in the world, and they were capable of knocking out of the sky the most sophisticated planes the United States had. Now, John McCain, the very well-respected former senator who died sadly recently, he was one of those American pilots knocked out of the sky by one of these weapons. And Fonda stood in these weapons and was photographed there. The photograph was a much more significant photograph than what was shown on 7:30 last Thursday, and she actually celebrated the fact that the North Vietnamese soldiers, with the support of Soviet Union weapons, were killing American aircrew. That's why she got the name Hanoi Jane, not because she was opposed to American involvement in the Vietnam War, because she was a participant in one side of the battle. She was a supporter of the people who wanted to kill American forces in the field. That's why she got the name.
Well, the ABC politely glosses over that little thing because why would they want to make Jane Fonda look more like she is rather than what they wanted to look like? Now to what she actually said on the ABC about global warming, Gerard. Here's Fonda on the show last week crying doom, and I mean that, crying literally.
Yeah. Even the small window that we have to avoid the tipping point, I think probably, I think it will be, this is what I'll be doing for the rest of my life. Yeah, because, it's the most important thing. If we don't make it, oh God, it breaks really breaks my heart. I have children, I have grandchildren. And things are just going to spiral out of control. All these wonderful species are going to go. And life is going to be very, very difficult to live. And eventually, possibly the human species will go as well because we are trashing our home. And I just, I wouldn't be able to live with myself or die with myself if I don't do something.
I think that's why global warming so appeals to drama queens, because you could so emote, the end of the world, and you cry. It's fantastic. Yeah. But shouldn't the ABC have challenged her on that, Gerard? Pointed out that life expectancy, in fact, still is rising. Grain crops keep setting new records, no starvation. The planet is getting greener, says NASA. The chances of human extinction really have never seemed smaller.
Well, I think you're being a bit heartless, Andrew. I reached for my hanky last Thursday, and there were tears on the floor. I had to mop them up. I mean, it was so moving and such a soft interview. But years ago, when people said the end of the world is nigh, they were commonly regarded as a bit odd, perhaps a nutcase. When Jane Fonda goes on what's supposed to be Australia's leading evening current affairs program and says the human species is at risk, Lisa House doesn't even say, is it? Or how is this the case?
I know.
She just says,
it's
we're all
weird.
doomed, let's all join in. So as if there's not enough doom and gloom around, you've got Jane Fonda crying for the end of the world, which she sort of feels she can't stop, even though she's going to try and stop it. I mean, really, this is not serious current affairs. This is absolute sort of mush that you might put in some kind of soft program somewhere, but not on leading television program. Now, what happens is that someone like Lisa House won't even challenge someone like Jane Fonda with even courteous questions.
Courteous is in the Gerard star. Yeah, courteous, Gerard, that's always your middle name.
Yeah.
On that point, you know, her message seems to be that of a teenager that the ABC also never challenges, Greta Thunberg. Have a listen.
People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
And it's true that Fonda, in this interview last week, said this teenager with his, end of the planet obsession and with her autism or Asperger's particularly, is her inspiration. Have a listen to this.
I've seen Greta on TV and found her, so clear, so direct. And of course, everyone talked about the fact that she was autistic. People with autism, with Asperger's, when they are interested in something, and she's been a science nerd all her little life, when they focus on that, it's with a laser focus. It doesn't matter if people agree with them. It doesn't matter if they're not popular.
Now, Gerard, I've been accused or criticised by our appalling press council for pointing out that actually, in this instance, Asperger's, is actually disadvantaged if it makes you, like Greta Thunberg, ignore objections and compromises and the human costs of this laser. If you're just so single-minded, it's all about global warming, don't worry about the human devastation by the preposterous plans that you propose that nobody, even you, can't even live by. But why does the ABC just go along with this utter tosh?
Well, it's like an old religion. It's a kind of faith, and it's embraced overwhelmingly by ABC presenters and producers, and if they don't hold that view, they're not prepared to say so publicly. So it's possible that Ms Sales doesn't hold that view, but she's not going to challenge Jane Fonda, who's expounding that view, or quoting Greta Thunberg, who's also expounding that view. So it's accepted because it's part of the faith they've embraced. And an error has no right. So if you challenge that faith, you're in the wrong. So they don't challenge it. And as to Asperger's, I mean, you got in the trouble with the Australian Press Council for saying that it wasn't a great thing to have. You're probably better off without it. Jane Fonda won't get in the trouble for saying it's a good thing to have, and you're better off with it in a sense, because it increases your judgment about the end of the world. It makes your judgment about the end of the world laser clear, as she said. So
if only we all had Asperger's, we'd be much happier. I mean. Well, look, I don't want to knock people with it. It's a terrible condition,
no,
it's
sad
hard for some people to deal with. But
and
for this, it's just preposterous. Yeah, I know. But in this thing, to laud a problem as a problem in how you view an issue like global warming as a virtue seems to me ridiculous. And I wonder, Gerard, whether it is one of those human weaknesses. You'd rather be wrong in company than right on your own. Or is it the noble corruption thing that you can tell any old rubbish if it's in a good cause?
I think people just like going with the fashions, particularly in a conservative free zone like the ABC. It's much easier to go with the green left fashion than oppose it. And if I just make a final point about Greta Thunberg, I'm not fussed if a teenager makes those comments. I mean, that's understandable. But when someone who's 80 years old, who's a very intelligent woman like Jane Fonda, tells us the end of the world is nigh and no one challenges her, that's when it becomes serious.
Absolutely. Gerard Henderson, thank you so much indeed once again for your time.
Pleasure.